There are certain nights when the human heart grows very quiet. Not because love has faded away, but because it is waiting in silence, hoping not to be misunderstood. And if these words somehow found you today, maybe a part of your soul is already exhausted from pretending you no longer care, while another part still secretly hopes that someone, somewhere, is holding on to you just as deeply. Because the truth is, someone may love you more profoundly than you realize. Not in the loud, dramatic way that movies often portray love, not through perfect timing or flawless words, but through hesitation, emotional uncertainty, and distance that conceals fear rather than a lack of interest. And before you convince yourself to walk away forever, you need to understand something that many people only discover too late. Some hearts do not stop loving you when they become silent. Sometimes silence is simply the final defense of a soul terrified of losing what it cannot fully express. Human beings are complicated when it comes to love, especially when love becomes real. We spend our entire lives believing we want deep, emotional connection. Yet the moment someone truly touches the hidden parts of us, fear begins to emerge. Carl Jung once described the unconscious mind as a vast ocean beneath human behavior. And when someone genuinely loves you, they do not merely touch your surface personality. They unintentionally awaken the forgotten pieces buried deep beneath it. Your insecurities, your unmet needs, your loneliness, your longing to finally be chosen without conditions. That kind of connection transforms people. It shakes them internally. It exposes emotional wounds they spent years hiding from themselves. This is why someone can deeply love you and still pull away at the exact moment you need reassurance the most. It feels contradictory, but psychologically it makes perfect sense. Love is not only warmth, love is exposure. Love is vulnerability. It is standing emotionally unguarded in front of another human being, hoping they will not use your tenderness against you. And many people were never taught how to survive emotional intimacy. They learned how to survive disappointment. They learned how to appear strong. They learned how to suppress emotions. But they never learned how to safely receive love without fear. So when this person became emotionally attached to you, something inside them began shifting in ways they could not fully explain. Your presence started influencing their emotional state. Your silence suddenly mattered. Your attention became emotionally comforting. Your absence became heavier than they expected, and that frightened them. Because once someone gains the power to emotionally affect your inner world, your subconscious immediately recognizes risk. Suddenly losing them becomes possible. Suddenly, abandonment feels imaginable again. Suddenly, your carefully protected independence no longer feels secure. Many people mistake emotional distance for lack of love. But often emotional distance is actually evidence of emotional overwhelm. There are people who become cold because they do not care, and there are others who become distant because they care too much. The second type is far more difficult to understand because their behavior contradicts their emotions. Their heart moves toward you, while their fear pulls them away. One part of them wants closeness. Another part whispers, "What if this ends the same way everything else ended?" And without realizing it, they begin protecting themselves from pain that has not even happened yet. Maybe you have already felt this contradiction yourself, the strange inconsistency, the emotional warmth followed by silence, the way they look at you when they think you are not paying attention, the way they remember small details about you without effort, the emotional tension that exists even within ordinary conversations, and yet something still feels blocked. Something remains unfinished. It is almost as though their soul keeps leaning toward you, while their mind keeps stepping backward. This is what unresolved emotional wounds often look like. People imagine trauma as dramatic destruction, but most emotional wounds are much quieter than that. They hide inside attachment patterns, inside fear of vulnerability, inside emotional withdrawal. Some people disappear emotionally the moment they start caring deeply, because closeness unconsciously reminds them of pain they never healed from. Perhaps they once loved someone who abandoned them. Perhaps they learned as children that emotional expression led to rejection. Perhaps vulnerability once embarrassed them so deeply that now their nervous system treats intimacy as danger. And the heartbreaking part is this: they may not even consciously understand why they are acting this way. The subconscious mind controls far more behavior than most people realize. A person can genuinely love you while simultaneously sabotaging the connection because internally their nervous system associates love with emotional risk. They want closeness, but closeness activates fear. They crave intimacy, but intimacy awakens vulnerability. So they begin sending mixed signals without fully understanding themselves. This is why emotionally mature love requires patience far more than passion. Passion is easy. Anyone can desire someone intensely for a moment. But true love asks something much harder from human beings. It asks them to remove emotional armor piece by piece. It asks them to trust again after disappointment. It asks them to remain emotionally open despite uncertainty. And for many people, that process feels terrifying because they have spent years building identities around emotional self-protection. You must also understand something important about silence. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is emotional processing happening beneath the surface. Some people speak their emotions immediately. Others retreat inward when emotions become too strong. They withdraw into thought, into confusion, into internal conflict, especially people who have spent their lives suppressing vulnerability. Their silence is not always punishment. Sometimes it is emotional survival. But this creates painful misunderstandings in relationships. One person interprets silence as rejection, while the other experiences silence as protection. One feels abandoned, while the other feels emotionally overwhelmed. And slowly, two people who deeply care for each other begin drifting apart. Not because love disappeared, but because fear became louder than communication. This is where many people give up too soon. They mistake emotional complexity for emotional absence. They assume love should always look obvious, consistent, and easy. But psychologically profound connections are rarely simple. They activate the deepest layers of human identity. They force people to confront their shadow selves, the insecure parts, the wounded parts, the frightened parts hidden beneath confidence and pride. Carl Jung believed that real love often becomes a mirror, not just a source of comfort, but a reflection of the unresolved self. And this is why certain connections feel spiritually intense. They force emotional awakening. They reveal patterns you never noticed before. They expose your fear of abandonment, your tendency to overgive, your fear of being unworthy, your desperate need for reassurance, your hidden loneliness. Suddenly, another human being unknowingly becomes connected to parts of your identity that you did not realize were still wounded. This person may be experiencing the exact same internal chaos right now. They may lie awake at night, replaying conversations with you, while pretending during the day that everything is normal. They may fight the urge to message you because emotional pride keeps interfering. They may miss you deeply while convincing themselves that distance is necessary. And perhaps the saddest part of human psychology is this: people often hurt the ones they love most because those are the only people capable of truly hurting them back. That realization changes everything when you begin viewing people through a psychological lens instead of a purely emotional one. Because suddenly you stop interpreting every confusing behavior as a lack of love. You begin recognizing emotional defense mechanisms hidden beneath actions. The delayed replies, the emotional inconsistency, the moments of withdrawal after intimacy, the fear hidden inside emotional restraint. None of these behaviors are healthy when left unresolved, but they are deeply human. And maybe this is the difficult truth your soul needed to hear today. Not every emotionally distant person is emotionally empty. Some are simply emotionally exhausted from surviving life with a guarded heart. There are people walking around carrying years of silent grief that nobody ever noticed. People who learned to appear emotionally independent because depending on others once shattered them. People who secretly long for tenderness but panic the moment they receive it consistently. They tell themselves they do not need anyone, yet they quietly crave the very connection they are afraid to accept. They convince themselves that distance will protect them, while all the while their heart keeps searching for closeness. They appear calm on the surface, while emotional storms move underneath. They smile during conversations, yet replay those same conversations for hours afterward. They act unaffected, while secretly measuring the emotional weight of every interaction. And when someone finally reaches the places inside them that have remained untouched for years, they often do not know how to respond. Part of them feels relieved, part of them feels terrified, part of them wants to move closer, part of them wants to run. This internal conflict can last far longer than people realize. It can create weeks of silence, months of hesitation, and countless moments where love exists, but expression does not. The tragedy is that many meaningful connections are lost, not because feelings disappeared, but because fear was never addressed. Because neither person fully understood what was happening beneath the surface. Because vulnerability felt dangerous. Because communication felt risky. Because emotional honesty required courage that both people were still learning to find. Yet even beneath the confusion, the feelings often remain. The care remains. The attachment remains. The memories remain. And sometimes, the heart continues holding on long after the mind has tried to let go. This does not mean every silent person is secretly in love. It does not mean every distance is meaningful. But it does mean that human emotions are often more complex than they appear. Sometimes people withdraw because they do not care. Sometimes they withdraw because they care far more than they know how to handle. Sometimes what looks like indifference is actually fear. Sometimes what appears to be avoidance is actually emotional overwhelm. And sometimes the person who seems the most distant is fighting the hardest battle within themselves. A battle between longing and self-protection, between hope and fear, between trust and uncertainty, between the desire to be loved and the fear of being hurt. That battle is invisible to most people, yet it shapes countless relationships every single day. So before you assume that silence always means absence, remember that some of the deepest emotions in the human experience exist beneath words, beneath explanations, beneath appearances, beneath the masks people wear to protect themselves. Because the heart does not always know how to communicate what it feels. Sometimes it hesitates, sometimes it retreats, sometimes it becomes quiet. Not because love is gone, but because love has reached a depth that the person carrying it does not yet know how to express. And somewhere between fear and affection, between distance and desire, between silence and truth, there are people who care far more deeply than their actions seem to reveal. People who are still learning that love was never meant to be feared. People who are still learning that vulnerability is not weakness. People who are still learning that being emotionally seen does not always lead to pain. And until they learn those lessons, their hearts may continue speaking a language that only silence seems to understand. People who have forgotten how to trust peaceful love often do so because chaos became familiar to them. If this person genuinely loves you, their internal struggle may be much deeper than you can currently perceive. But there is another side to this truth that should never be ignored. Love by itself is not enough without emotional growth. You cannot rescue someone from their own unconscious patterns if they refuse to face themselves honestly. You cannot endlessly sacrifice your emotional well-being, hoping your love will somehow heal another person's fears. Authentic connection requires mutual emotional responsibility. Compassion matters deeply, yes, but so does self-respect. Understanding someone's wounds should never require abandoning your own emotional needs completely. This is where emotional maturity becomes essential. Emotionally mature love does not beg for crumbs. It does not slowly destroy itself, trying to prove its worth. It does not chase endlessly while neglecting dignity and self-respect. Mature love understands patience without self-abandonment. It creates space without emotionally disappearing. It offers compassion without losing healthy boundaries. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is not forcing a connection, but allowing someone the emotional room to confront themselves honestly. Because transformation cannot be controlled from the outside. A person changes only when their soul grows tired of repeating the same emotional cycles over and over again. Perhaps this connection entered your life not only to bring love, but also to awaken you psychologically. To teach you the difference between attachment and genuine emotional alignment. To reveal how deeply you crave emotional reciprocity. To force you to confront the ways you have ignored your own intuition out of fear of losing someone important. Think carefully about this. Have there been moments when your intuition quietly whispered the truth long before your mind was willing to accept it? Moments where you sensed their feelings beneath their words. Moments where something inside you knew more than logic could explain. Human beings are far more intuitive than they often realize. The subconscious constantly reads emotional energy, body language, emotional shifts, silence patterns, eye contact, nervous tension, and countless subtle signals. Long before logic catches up, the soul often already knows. That is why certain people remain emotionally unforgettable, not because they were perfect, but because they emotionally awaken something dormant inside you. And awakening is rarely comfortable. Sometimes awakening arrives through longing, sometimes through confusion, sometimes through emotional distance that forces deep inner reflection. Sometimes through missing someone so intensely that you finally confront the loneliness you had been hiding from yourself. Pain has a strange psychological purpose. It strips away illusions. It exposes emotional truth. It reveals where healing is still needed. This is why some relationships completely transform your inner world, even when they never become fully stable on the outside. They force growth. They force awareness. They force emotional evolution. And perhaps this person is currently standing at the edge of that transformation themselves. Maybe they are slowly realizing that emotional avoidance no longer protects them the way it once did. Maybe your absence has forced them to confront feelings they spent a long time suppressing. Maybe they are beginning to understand that real love cannot survive forever inside silence and pride. Because eventually, every human being reaches a moment when loneliness becomes heavier than vulnerability. And when that moment arrives, people begin changing. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. They begin recognizing the emotional walls they built around themselves. They start noticing how often fear controlled their choices. They realize how many opportunities for genuine connection they sabotaged while trying to protect themselves from pain. And for the first time, they begin understanding that emotional safety cannot exist without emotional openness. This realization changes everything. But while they navigate their own awakening, you must continue navigating yours. Do not allow uncertainty to destroy your sense of self-worth. Do not let another person's emotional confusion convince you that you are difficult to love. The way someone responds to intimacy often reflects their relationship with themselves far more than it reflects your value as a human being. Many emotionally unavailable people are not withholding love because you are unworthy. They are withholding because they themselves are afraid. Afraid of needing someone, afraid of emotional dependence, afraid of rejection, afraid of losing control, afraid of being emotionally seen too clearly. And ironically, the more deeply they love, the more vulnerable they feel. This creates a painful internal contradiction. They crave closeness while resisting it at the same time. And unless they consciously heal, they remain trapped between desire and fear. But you cannot carry the emotional burden for both souls. You can love someone deeply and still choose emotional balance. You can understand someone psychologically without excusing endless emotional inconsistency. Compassion should never become self-destruction. This is one of the most important lessons emotionally awakened people eventually learn. Love should expand your spirit, not slowly erase it. And yet, despite all this complexity, there are still connections worth fighting for. Rare connections where two souls gradually learn each other's fears with tenderness instead of judgment. Connections where emotional walls slowly soften with time. Connections where both people choose healing instead of ego. These relationships do exist, but they require honesty. They require accountability. They require vulnerability. They require patience. They require emotional courage. Most importantly, they require two people willing to stop running from themselves. Because every relationship eventually becomes a confrontation with the self. You cannot truly love another person while remaining completely disconnected from your own emotional truth. That is why shadow work matters. Shadow work is not simply spiritual language. Psychologically, it means facing the hidden parts of yourself honestly. The jealousy you deny, the fears you hide, the loneliness you distract yourself from, the emotional patterns you repeat unconsciously, the wounds you pretend no longer affect you. Until people confront these hidden layers, relationships often continue repeating the same pain in different forms. Perhaps this person is finally beginning to face their shadow because of you. Perhaps your love became too real to ignore, too emotionally honest, too psychologically awakening. And even if they have not fully figured themselves out yet, something inside them knows your connection matters. Human beings do not emotionally struggle this deeply over people who mean nothing to them. Real emotional conflict usually exists where genuine attachment exists. That is why indifference feels cold and simple, while love feels complicated and emotionally alive. If someone truly does not care, their energy becomes emotionally flat. But when someone deeply loves you while battling inner fear, their energy becomes inconsistent, emotionally charged, confusing, and intense. You feel their internal conflict even when words are absent. You have probably already sensed this, the emotional pull, the unfinished feeling, the strange intuitive knowing that beneath all the silence, something meaningful still exists. And maybe you have questioned yourself repeatedly because of it. Maybe part of you keeps wondering whether you are imagining things. But deep emotional intuition rarely appears without a reason. The human subconscious constantly perceives emotional truths hidden beneath surface behavior. Still, intuition must always be balanced with wisdom. Do not romanticize emotional suffering endlessly. Do not become addicted to uncertainty simply because intensity feels meaningful. Some people remain trapped in painful dynamics because emotional unpredictability creates psychological addiction. The nervous system becomes attached to emotional highs and lows. Calm love can initially feel unfamiliar or even boring after chaotic attachment. This is why healing changes attraction. Emotionally healed people no longer chase emotional confusion to feel alive. They begin valuing consistency, emotional safety, honesty, reliability, and peace. They stop interpreting emotional unavailability as depth. They stop trying to earn love through suffering. And perhaps this entire experience is slowly guiding you toward that realization as well. Because sometimes the universe does not send someone into your life merely to complete you. Sometimes it sends them to transform you, to awaken your standards, to strengthen your emotional awareness, to teach you that your heart deserves reciprocity rather than emotional guessing games forever. At the same time, transformation takes time for everyone involved. If this person truly loves you, they may currently be fighting battles inside themselves that nobody else can see. Battles between old wounds and new hope. Between fear and desire. Between self-protection and emotional surrender. Between the instinct to run and the longing to stay. Between the comfort of familiar defenses and the possibility of genuine connection. And somewhere within that struggle, they may be slowly learning what every heart eventually learns: that love is not the enemy, fear is. And healing begins the moment someone becomes brave enough to stop running from both. And maybe right now, they are standing alone somewhere, replaying the sound of your voice in their mind, wondering whether it is already too late to reach for you with honesty. The human heart often carries regret more heavily than rejection. Many people would rather avoid vulnerability for a while than risk losing someone forever, until one day they realize that silence itself became the reason they lost them. Do not underestimate how deeply people can feel emotions they struggle to express outwardly. Some of the deepest love stories remain hidden beneath restrained behavior. Not because restraint is ideal, but because human beings are emotionally imperfect souls, trying to survive their own histories while still longing to be loved completely. That is what makes love both beautiful and heartbreaking. Two wounded souls trying to trust each other while carrying invisible emotional scars. Two nervous systems shaped by different experiences of pain. Two inner children silently asking the same question: will you still stay if you truly see me? And maybe that question sits at the center of this connection too, because beneath pride, beneath silence, beneath fear, beneath emotional confusion, there is often simply a human being terrified of not being enough for the person they love. People rarely admit this openly, but many emotionally distant individuals secretly believe they will eventually disappoint the people they care about.